Some of this story may not be suitable for younger viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. I never meant to carry this memory with me for a lifetime. In fact, I've spent decades trying to bury it, convincing myself that the war had already taken enough from me and that I had no obligation to dig up the ghosts of 1944. But silence doesn't erase the truth. It only lets it rot deeper in the shadows. And what we saw that winter should never be forgotten, no matter how much I wish it could be. It was the bitter end of '44. Snow smothered the forests in the east. Silence heavy enough to muffle even the sound of boots breaking through the drifts. We were young, most of us, just boys wearing uniforms that didn't quite fit. The brass told us the mission was simple. Sweep through abandoned German outposts, make sure no stragglers were left behind, and burn anything useful that could be turned back against us. Routine work, they called it, nothing more than clearing ruins and frozen mud huts. But war has a way of disguising its worst horrors as something ordinary. When we arrived at the outpost, the first thing I noticed was how still the place was. Not the kind of stillness you expect in winter. This was heavier, thicker, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Even the wind, sharp as razors in those days, seemed to stop just short of the perimeter. The outpost itself looked harmless enough, a half-collapsed farmhouse. Its windows shattered, its walls blackened by old fire. A few skeletal barracks stood nearby, roofs caved in, snow packed in like coffins waiting to be sealed. On the surface, it was nothing unusual, just another ruin swallowed by war. But as we pushed through the broken doorway, the air inside seemed wrong. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, dense, as though whatever lived here before had left its breath behind. The faint smell of chemicals stung my nostrils, mixing with the acrid tang of scorched wood. It felt like stepping into a place the earth itself wanted to reject. Our lanterns cut through the gloom, throwing long, warped shadows across the walls. That's when we saw them. The chains, thick iron links bolted into the stone, not for holding livestock, but for holding something far stronger. The wood around the bolts was scarred, deep grooves etched into the beams, claw marks, human-sized but wrong, too long, too sharp. One of the men, Jackson, muttered under his breath, "This isn't set a house, this is a cage." Beds lined the far wall, if you could even call them beds. Iron frames, stained mattresses torn open, springs jutting out like broken ribs. Black streaks covered the fabric, too dark, too old to tell if it was mold or blood. We exchanged looks but said nothing. Soldiers aren't supposed to flinch at ruins. We were used to seeing what men could do to each other. But this wasn't the work of war as we knew it. There were no bullet holes, no shrapnel scars, no signs of firefights. This place hadn't been destroyed by battle. It had been abandoned on purpose, left behind like a wound no one dared to touch. The silence pressed harder the deeper we moved inside. Every board creaked under our weight. Every lantern hiss seemed too loud. And then, faint but clear, we heard it. The first sound. It came from the stairwell at the back of the hall, a low creak, slow and deliberate, as though someone had been waiting all this time and finally decided to announce themselves. Our rifles snapped up as one, barrels trained on the narrow staircase curling into the shadows above. Then a glow appeared halfway up the stairs. A lantern, its light swaying gently. For a moment, I thought it was another soldier, maybe one of ours cut off and hiding. But when the figure stepped into view, every instinct screamed otherwise. He was tall, gaunt, dressed not in uniform but in a long white coat that fluttered slightly as he descended. His thin mustache was clipped with precision, his hair neatly combed despite the filth around him. But it was his eyes that froze us where we stood, calm, unblinking, as though the rifles pointed at his chest were nothing more than an inconvenience. He carried a small case in one hand and in the other a fountain pen. He had been writing as though the world outside had not collapsed into fire and ruin. He spoke without fear, his voice low and steady, like a professor addressing a classroom. And in words that cut through me like a knife, he called us by rank, not by guesswork, not at random. He named us one by one, his German tongue curling around English words he had no business knowing. We shouted for him to stop, to raise his hands, to explain himself. He obeyed, almost lazily, raising his palms as though we were nothing but children pointing sticks at him. And then the sound came. Not from him, but from behind him, from deeper in the house. It wasn't the bark of a dog or the howl of a wolf. It was worse. It was lower, wet, like a throat ripped open and patched together with wire, struggling to form the sound of life. The man in the white coat tilted his head slightly, as if listening with satisfaction. Then he looked back at us and said something I will never forget. They are not pets. They do not answer to names. They answer only to hunger. We froze where we stood, rifles steady but hearts hammering. None of us knew what to do. The man in the white coat, later we would only refer to him as the doctor, stood calmly at the foot of the stairs, as if he had been waiting for us all along. His pale face was smooth, unreadable, but his eyes burned with a kind of confidence I had never seen before. Not fear, not even defiance. It was worse than that, certainty. He didn't look like a prisoner. He didn't look like someone hiding. He looked like a man who still believed he was in control. Then came the sound again from deeper in the ruin. This time it was closer, dragging against the silence of the house like chains being pulled across stone. We couldn't tell if it came from upstairs or below our feet, but it was there, wet, animal, wrong. "Hold your fire," our sergeant whispered. His voice was barely more than breath, but every one of us heard it. He wanted answers before bullets. The doctor smiled faintly. "You have already walked too far," he said, his English precise but heavy with accent. "This place is not meant for your kind. Turn back. Seal it. Forget it." Forget it. That phrase hit me harder than the cold air. Soldiers didn't forget. We weren't trained to. We cataloged, we reported, we destroyed. But the way he said it, it wasn't a warning, it was an instruction. As though the order came from something higher than him, higher than all of us. One of the younger privates, Miller, couldn't take the tension. He stepped forward, rifle up, shouting at the doctor to explain himself. For the first time, the man's expression changed. His lips curled into the faintest smirk, not fear, not anger, just satisfaction. "You are curious," he said softly. "That is the flaw of your kind, curiosity without discipline." He gestured toward the case in his hand, setting it gently on a table as though it contained glass. He flicked open the latch. Inside, papers, dozens of them, covered in diagrams, numbers, sketches of things I couldn't quite make sense of. Not machines, not weapons, bodies, altered bodies. Muscles rearranged, bones cut and reshaped. Miller swore under his breath, spitting on the floor like the sight alone was poison. "You sick bastard," he muttered. The doctor only nodded, as if Miller had confirmed something. "Sick," he repeated. "Yes, but sickness is the mother of strength. You will see." That sound again. This time, closer still, no longer muffled. It rose up through the floorboards beneath us, vibrating in the wood, rattling the chains bolted into the beams. My stomach dropped. Whatever it wasn't small. The sergeant barked an order. "Secure him." Two of our men moved forward, rifles trained on the doctor, ready to bind his hands. But before they reached him, the floor shook. Just once, hard enough to make the lantern glass tremble, hard enough to send dust falling from the rafters. We spun, weapons raised, eyes darting. That's when we saw the trap door. It was half hidden under a collapsed table, its edges reinforced with thick iron. Not from our side, but from below. Something was pushing, pounding, straining to get out. The doctor's smile widened almost imperceptibly. "Do not open it," he said quietly. "You will not like what looks back at you." The words chilled me more than the wind outside ever could. But the sergeant was a man of orders, not superstition. He signaled us to clear the debris. The table was dragged aside, boots crunching over glass and splinters. The trapdoor rattled violently now, chains scraping, bolts groaning as though they might snap. Miller whispered, "Jesus Christ, what the hell did they keep down there?" The doctor tilted his head, studying us as though we were part of some experiment he had been conducting all along. "What you call hell," he said softly, "was built here, We didn't get to decide whether to open it. The trapdoor exploded upward with a sound that will haunt me until my last breath. Wood splintered like gunfire. Iron shrieked as bolts tore from the stone, and from the darkness below something surged. The lantern light caught glimpses, claws slick with blood that wasn't fresh, eyes that burned faintly yellow in the gloom, skin stretched too tight across a frame too big, too wrong. The stench hit us next. Rot, copper, and something chemical, like the tang of bleach soaked into flesh. Every rifle went off at once. The room erupted in thunder. Bullets tore splinters from the walls, sparks from the chains, smoke filling the air. The thing shrieked, not like a man, not like an animal, but both mangled into one long scream that seemed to claw at the inside of my skull. The doctor didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just stood there watching, his smirk unbroken, as if this chaos was the exact outcome he had predicted. Through the smoke, through the madness, his voice cut clean and sharp. "You cannot kill hunger." Smoke clung to the room like a living thing, thick and choking, curling around the lantern light until everything became shadows. The gunfire rattled on, deafening, each shot tearing another hole in the dark. But nothing was falling, nothing was stopping. When the magazines finally clicked empty, silence crashed down, heavy, unnatural silence broken only by the ringing in our ears. And then we saw it. The thing stood half out of the trapdoor, shoulders hunched, breathing ragged but strong, too strong. Its chest rose and fell like a furnace, every exhale steaming in the icy air. In the smoke, its body looked human for half a second. Limbs, torso, head, but then the light hit its face. It was instead a face. It was stretched, broken, as though someone had started with a man and then sculpted something else over him. The skin looked pale, but underneath it pulsed with dark veins like roots clawing through stone. Its mouth, too wide, too jagged, filled with teeth that didn't belong to any animal I had seen. One of the men screamed. I can't even remember which one. It might have been me. The thing lunged forward. The table crashed aside, chairs splintered like matchsticks, and before we could reload, it was among us. It didn't move like a beast. It moved with a soldier's precision, fast, controlled, deliberate. A swipe of its claws sent Miller flying against the wall, his rifle clattering uselessly to the ground. His body twitched, then went still. The rest of us scrambled, fumbling with ammunition, shouting orders no one could follow. The sergeant barked for us to form up, but the room was too small, too chaotic. We were rats trapped in a cage with something that had been bred to kill. Bullets went in again, this time at closer range, flashes lighting up its twisted form. I swear I saw the rounds hit, saw them punch into its chest, its limbs. But instead of dropping, it roared and kept coming. Flesh tore, but the wounds closed almost instantly, skin knitting over like wax melting back into shape. The doctor stood calmly by the wall, watching as though the scene unfolding was a lecture for an audience of one. His hands were folded neatly behind his back, his smirk carved into his pale face. You see, he called out over the chaos. The Reich was never meant to die, only to evolve. The words cut through me like a blade. This wasn't madness, this was planned. Whatever this thing was, they had made it on purpose. One of our men, Jacobs, charged with a bayonet fixed to his rifle. Brave, stupid, desperate, maybe all three. He drove the blade into the thing's side with a scream. For a heartbeat, hope flared. The blade sank deep right into its ribs. The thing turned, slowly, calmly. Its hand wrapped around Jacob's throat. With one jerk, it lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. His legs kicked, his hands clawed at the iron grip, bayonet still stuck in the monster's chest. Then, with a sound I'll never forget, his neck snapped. The body crumpled like a doll, discarded on the floor. We were breaking. Fear was stronger than training now. Men backed into corners, rifles shaking, eyes wild. One muttered prayers under his breath. Another cursed loud and ragged, like maybe he thought he could scare the thing away with words. The sergeant, though, he didn't move. He stood his ground, rifle steady, eyes locked on the creature. He was a rock in a storm, and for a second I believed he might actually find a way to stop it. He shouted for us to fall back, to regroup in the hall, to drag the wounded if we could. His voice was steady, commanding, and somehow in the middle of that nightmare, we listened. We grabbed Miller's limp form, Jacob's rifle, anything we could, and stumbled toward the doorway. The thing didn't follow immediately. It stood there, half in shadow, half in light, breathing, watching, studying. The doctor stepped closer to it, almost affectionately. He placed a hand against its chest, right where the bullets had torn holes seconds earlier. His fingers came away slick with blood, or whatever passed for blood, but he didn't flinch. "They are not ready to understand you," he whispered. And for the first time I realized something worse than the creature itself. It wasn't set in control. The doctor was. We stumbled into the hall, hearts pounding, boots slipping on the dust. The sergeant slammed the door shut behind us, shouting for someone to brace it. Two men shoved a cabinet against the frame, their hands trembling as they tried to hold it steady. For a moment, silence, just our gasping breaths, the crackle of our lanterns. Then the pounding began. Not frantic, not wild, measured, deliberate. Each slam of the door rattled the frame, the cabinet, the very walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Cracks spidered across the plaster. The thing was strong, but worse than that, it was patient. One of the privates whispered, "We should sift, never come here." And for once, the sergeant didn't argue. He just looked back at the door, jaw tight, eyes hollow, and said nothing. Because deep down, we all knew the truth. We hadn't just stumbled into an abandoned facility. We had opened a cage, and the cage wasn't built to hold forever. The door rattled again, harder this time. The cabinet screeched across the stone floor, its weight shifting inch by inch. Every slam was like thunder in the hallway, echoing down the cold concrete walls. We pressed our shoulders against it, our boots digging into the cracked tiles, every muscle straining to hold the line. And then it stopped. Silence. Not the kind of silence that soothes. This silence was worse. It was calculated, heavy, waiting. We stared at the door, rifles raised, but nothing came. You could feel it just on the other side, listening, breathing, the quiet pressed against us. Until sweat rolled down our necks, until every heartbeat sounded too loud. "Why isn't it trying again?" one of the younger soldiers whispered. The sergeant didn't answer. He was listening too, his head tilted, his eyes darting along the hallway. Something wasn't right. Then came the scraping. Not claws against wood, not fists pounding. Something softer, slower, like nails trailing along metal. A deliberate scratch that started low and rose higher, dragging across the door in long, cruel strokes. The sound dug into our skulls, set teeth on edge. A couple of the men clamped their hands over their ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just outside, it felt like it was inside. The sergeant barked, "Move," and we didn't argue. We abandoned the barricade and rushed deeper down the hallway, lantern light bouncing wildly across the walls. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, door after door sealed shut with rusted bolts and faded signs in German. Some doors had warnings scrawled in chalk, others had claw marks carved deep into the steel. Whatever had been done here, it hadn't been meant for the world outside. We reached a junction where the hall split into two. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of rust and mold mixed with something fouler, something like rotting meat. We hesitated, left or right. Before we could decide, a muffled thud sounded behind us. Then another, then the screech of tearing wood. It was breaking through. Panic surged. We bolted down the left corridor, boots slapping, lanterns swaying, rifles clutched so tight our knuckles turned white. The hall curved, spiraling downward into the earth like a tunnel that had no end. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow. Finally, the sergeant raised his fist, and we skidded to a halt. He pointed at a heavy steel door ahead, half open, rust flaking along the hinges. It led into a larger chamber. We spilled inside, slammed it shut, and threw the latch. The room was massive. Some kind of laboratory, or what was left of one. Tables were overturned, glassware shattered across the floor. Shelves sagged with broken jars, their contents long dried into unrecognizable stains. Old papers littered the ground, curling and brittle, scribbled with diagrams of anatomy that looked almost, but not quite, human. And then we saw the cages. Dozens of them stacked along the walls. Some were big enough for dogs, others large enough to hold a man. Bars bent outward, locks snapped, claw marks gouged into the iron. Inside a few, bones lay in heaps, yellowed and brittle, stripped clean. Whatever had been in here, it hadn't all stayed here. One of the privates whispered, "This is a slaughterhouse." Another said, "No, this was a workshop." Before we could argue, the sound came again, the low groan of metal bending under pressure. We turned, weapons up, hearts pounding, the latch trembled. Dust rained down, and then it stopped. We held our breath. Seconds passed, then minutes, the silence dragged on. The sergeant finally nodded toward the far end of the lab, where another door waited, half hidden behind shelves. "Move," he ordered. His voice was steady, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew we weren't outrunning it, we were just delaying the inevitable. We edged past the cages, rifles sweeping the shadows. My boots crunched on glass, echoing too loud in the cavernous room. Every shadow seemed alive. Every flicker of lantern light looked like something moving. We reached the far door and pushed it open. Beyond was a stairwell, plunging deeper underground. Cold air rushed up to meet us, carrying with it the smell of wet stone and earth, and something else, faint but unmistakable. Perfume. Sweet, floral, cloying. It didn't said belong here. One of the men gagged, covering his mouth. Another whispered, "What the hell is that?" No one answered. The sergeant signaled for silence. We began our descent. Step by step, the stairs groaned under our weight. The lantern light barely pierced the black below. That steps when we heard it. Not the creature, not claws, not scraping. A voice, soft, female, humming. A lullaby. It floated up the stairwell, calm and gentle, out of place in the nightmare around us. The sound wrapped around us, warm and soothing, pulling us downward like a hook in our chests. My legs felt heavy, my thoughts fogged. I needed to follow it. The sergeant grabbed my collar, yanking me back. His face was hard, his jaw clenched, but I could see it in his eyes. He'd heard it too. He'd almost listened. The humming stopped. Silence again, but not the safe kind. And in that silence, from the shadows below, two glowing eyes blinked open. The eyes glowed faintly at first, two pale orbs hovering in the black below. At that distance, they looked human. Too human, but the longer we stared, the more wrong they seemed. They didn't blink in rhythm. They didn't move like eyes should. They hovered too far apart, like something trying to pretend it was human, but failing. No one spoke. No one breathed. We were frozen on the stairs, rifles trembling in our hands. The humming had stopped, but its echo seemed lodged in our skulls, refusing to leave. Then the sound came again. Not humming, not claws. Soft, crooked, almost playful. Kommt näher. German. Two simple words. Come closer. My blood ran cold. The sergeant barked. Fall back, but our legs wouldn't move fast enough. Something was already coming up the stairs. Slow at first, a dragging sound as if long nails scraped along the stone. Then heavier, faster, a weight pounding the steps with impossible speed. We fired. The stairwell exploded in muzzle flashes. Bullets sparked against stone, ricocheted in the narrow passage, but something screamed in reply. A shriek so high, so inhuman, it rattled the very walls. The lantern shattered in the chaos, plunging us into near total darkness. Only the eyes remained, brighter now, bounding up the stairwell toward us. We ran. We didn't wait for orders, didn't look back. We barreled through the laboratory, glass crunching, papers flying. The thing's scream followed us, closer and closer, rattling the cages as it moved. Something heavy slammed into the far door as we reached the middle of the room, the iron hinges groaning. The sergeant shouted, "Cover the flank," and two men spun to fire. Their bullets tore into the dark as claws slashed out, catching one by the throat. He screamed once before the sound was cut short. Blood sprayed across the cages. The second soldier panicked, tripped backward, and vanished into the shadows with another scream. We were down 2 men in seconds. The rest of us surged toward the far side of the lab, shoving shelves aside, scraping across the floor, that hidden door the sergeant had spotted earlier. We found it again, wrenched it open, and stumbled into another corridor. We slammed it behind us, locking it with a bar of rusted steel. Silence. Only the sound of our ragged breathing. We huddled in the narrow passage, rifles raised, ears straining. The door shuddered once, then went still. Whatever it wasn't following. At least not directly, but that was worse. That meant it was waiting. We pushed deeper into the corridor. The air grew colder, damp with groundwater, and the walls seemed to close in tighter around us. This hall wasn't like the others. No signs, no warnings, just raw stone reinforced with steel beams. It felt older, buried deeper, like this part had been carved before the rest of the facility was even planned. One of the privates muttered, "This place isn't set German, not all of it." The sergeant glanced at him sharply. Quiet. But I knew he was right. These tunnels didn't look like Nazi engineering. They looked ancient, like we had stumbled into something that had been waiting long before 1944. The deeper we went, the stranger it became. Symbols appeared on the walls, carved deep into the stone, glowing faintly under the dim light of our backup lantern. Not German script, not even Latin, curved lines, intersecting spirals, jagged runes that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. The youngest of us whispered, "We shouldn't be here." And he was right. At last, the corridor opened into another chamber. Smaller than the lab, but stranger. Stone altars lined the walls, stained dark with something I didn't want to name. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. And in the center, on a cracked pedestal, sat a book. It wasn't dusty, it wasn't old. It looked untouched, as though it had been placed there yesterday. The leather binding was dark, almost wet, and the pages seemed to pulse with faint movement, as if they were breathing. The sergeant signaled us to hold. He stepped forward, boots echoing too loud in the chamber. He reached for the book, and then the humming returned. Not from the stairwell this time. From the book, a soft, lilting melody, too sweet for this place, vibrating through the air. My stomach turned as the sound wrapped around us again, pulling us closer, fogging our minds. My rifle felt heavier, my feet wanted to move. One of the privates staggered forward, eyes glazed, hand outstretched. "Stop!" the sergeant roared, yanking him back. The spell broke for a moment, but in the pause the whisper came again, faint, all around us, in dozens of voices. Male, female, children, elderly, all repeating the same phrase. "Kommt näher, kommt näher." Come closer. The lantern flickered. The shadows grew longer. The chains on the ceiling rattled. And behind us, in the corridor we had just come from, the door screeched open. The door behind us didn't simply creak open, it screamed. The steel bar we had shoved through the handles bent like it was nothing, the hinges grinding as though something stronger than any human hand was pushing through. The sound echoed down the chamber, drowning out the whispers for a heartbeat. Then both merged, the groan of the door and the chanting, into one dreadful chorus. We raised our rifles again, but none of us wanted to fire. We knew, deep down, bullets hadn't stopped it before. The sergeant grabbed the cursed book, slamming it shut with both hands. The humming cut off instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against our ears. It was almost a relief until we realized the chains overhead were still swaying, harder now, clanging like a warning bell. Something massive entered the tunnel behind us. Its footsteps weren't quick this time. They were deliberate, confident, as if it knew we were trapped. We backed toward the far side of the room. There was another exit, narrow, half blocked by debris. But it was something. We scrambled for it, boots skidding on the stone, lanterns shaking in the darkness. The whispers rose again, louder, angrier, like dozens of voices all arguing inside our skulls. "Komm zurück, zurück. Come back, stay." The youngest private dropped his rifle and clutched his ears, screaming. Blood trickled from his nose. The sergeant hauled him up, dragging him forward, but the shadows on the wall twisted, stretching into shapes with teeth, claws, wings. They weren't just tricks of the light, they moved on their own, twitching and snapping as if waiting for us to stumble close enough. One of them lunged. Not a shadow, not quite solid, but enough. It caught another soldier by the arm. He fired point blank into the wall, but the shadow didn't let go. It pulled, impossibly strong, dragging him toward the darkness. His scream filled the chamber until suddenly it didn't. He was gone, swallowed by stone as if the wall had simply eaten him. The rest of us shoved through the debris, clawing at rocks with bleeding hands until we forced an opening wide enough to slip through. We stumbled into yet another corridor, this one smaller, tighter, and colder. The book pulsed in the sergeant's hands like it had a heartbeat of its own. That was when the voices changed. No longer German, now English. They knew us.
Stay, you can sit, leave.
It sets too late. The youngest soldier sobbed. The sergeant slapped him hard, snapping him back to focus. Keep moving, he barked. We did, but the corridor sloped downward now, deeper into the earth. The air grew heavy, damp, and stinking of rot. The lantern barely lit more than a few feet ahead, and in that flickering light we saw bones, not a few. Piles, scattered along the floor, crushed into dust beneath our boots, wedged into the cracks of the walls. Human remains, but not only human, skulls too long, ribs too wide, teeth that didn't match anything we'd ever seen. The whispers fell silent. That was worse, because in the silence, we heard it. Breathing, not ours. Something bigger, slower, a rasping inhale, a rattling exhale, echoing through the dark like a slumbering giant. The corridor ended in another chamber, vast and echoing, and in the center of it, half hidden by shadows, was something alive. Not a man, not an animal, something in between. Its body was massive, hunched, stitched together like the abominations we'd glimpsed in the cages upstairs, but far larger, its shoulders brushing the ceiling, its arms dragging along the floor. Tubes and wires still clung to its flesh, feeding into it from machines that hadn't worked in years. But its chest rose and fell, slow and steady, as though in unnatural sleep. The sergeant froze, we all did. The thing was chained, enormous links stretching from its limbs to anchors driven into the rock. Some were rusted through, dangling loose. Others still held, groaning with each shallow movement. The youngest soldier whispered, "What is that?" None of us answered. We didn't want to. Because we knew, deep down, this was the centerpiece of the facility. The reason it had been built, not a weapon, not a lab, a prison. The Nazis hadn't created it. They had found it. And now we had found it too. The sergeant signaled us back. Slow, careful, we leave. Now he mouthed. But the book in his hands pulsed again, stronger, and the whispers returned, not faint this time, not distant. They came from the creature itself. Not with its mouth, but with its mind. Stay. It breathed into our skulls. Free me. The sergeant's hands shook. He dropped the book. It hit the stone floor and snapped open, pages fluttering. The whispers erupted into a roar, hundreds of voices layered together. The creature stirred, its head lifted, pale eyes flickering open in the dark. They were the same eyes we'd seen in the stairwell. It hadn't been chasing us. It had been leading us here. The creature's eyes burned in the dark like pale lanterns, not glowing, not natural, but reflecting, catching the faint light of our lantern and throwing it back with an emptiness that made my stomach twist. It was awake. Chains rattled as it moved. First a twitch of its hand, fingers far too long, tipped with black claws that scraped the stone floor. Then its chest expanded with a deep inhale, the sound like bellows sucking air after centuries. Dust shook loose from the ceiling with each breath. None of us dared fire. Maybe because we knew it wouldn't help, maybe because fear froze our hands in place. The sergeant finally hissed, "Back." But the creature was faster. One chain snapped, shattering stone as it pulled free from the wall. The sound rang through the chamber like cannon fire. The youngest soldier screamed and bolted for the exit tunnel. The sergeant grabbed him, but too late. Something invisible shoved the boy back, hurling him against the far wall. His body crumpled. Not claws, not chains. It hadn't touched him at all. The whispers filled our heads again, deafening, overlapping, a chorus that made it impossible to think. They weren't words anymore. They were hunger. The sergeant snatched the cursed book from the ground and tried to slam it shut, but the pages fought him, whipping open against his grip like a living thing. The whispers got louder, drilling into our skulls until blood leaked from our ears. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, but even through the pain I saw it, those chains snapping one by one. With each break, the creature straightened more, rising taller, unfolding from its crouch, until it nearly scraped the ceiling of the cavern. Its skin was stretched thin over muscle that looked too heavy to belong to flesh, and its head was wrong, elongated, with a mouth too wide, filled with rows of teeth that never seemed to end. The machines wired into its flesh sparked weakly, lights flickering as though even after decades they still tried to feed it, still tried to keep it alive. But the truth was clearer now. It didn't need them. It had always been alive. Waiting? The sergeant roared, "Go!" We staggered toward the exit tunnel. Only 3 of us left now. The whispers turned into a single command, so strong it shook the stone walls. Stay. The tunnel in front of us collapsed. Rocks poured down in an avalanche, sealing the only exit we could see. Dust choked our lungs, the air filling with grit. We spun, trapped. The creature stepped forward, the floor trembling under its weight. I don't know why, but the sergeant ran straight at it. Maybe to buy us time, maybe because the book in his hands burned like fire and he thought he could stop it. He charged, screaming, shoving the book against its chest as if to force it back. For a second, it worked. The whispers cut off, the creature froze, its claws twitching, its chest convulsing. The chains still attached yanked taut, dragging it back. For one heartbeat, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd won. Then the sergeant screamed. The book fused to his hands. Flesh bubbled where it touched, burning straight through his skin. He begged us to shoot him, but none of us moved. His scream wasn't just pain, it was a chorus. Dozens of voices spilling out of his throat as if the book itself was using him. The creature leaned down, jaws opening wide, and swallowed him whole. The book vanished with him. The whispers stopped. Silence again. Only 2 of us remained. We pressed against the cavern wall, rifles shaking, praying for a miracle. The creature didn't lunge, didn't chase. Instead, it lowered its head, staring at us with those pale, empty eyes. Then, to our horror, it spoke. Not whispers, not inside our minds, out loud. "You will carry me," it rumbled. Its voice was like stone grinding on stone, ancient and patient. "You will walk free, and I will walk with you." The ground trembled. Another wall split open, as though the mountain itself obeyed it, revealing a narrow tunnel leading upward. Cold air rushed in, the outside world. The other soldier didn't wait. He bolted. I followed, lungs burning, boots pounding stone. Behind us, chains dragged, rocks split, and that voice followed, softer now but still inside me. Not yet, but soon. We burst out into the night. Snow lashed our faces, stars wide above. The facility behind us groaned as though collapsing. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, no entrance, no ruin. Just a blank hillside of rock and ice, as if the Werwolf Facility had never existed. We stumbled back toward Allied lines days later, half-starved, half-mad, mumbling about shadows and whispers. They didn't believe us. They locked us in infirmaries, wrote it off as frostbite hallucinations and stress. The other survivor hanged himself within the year. Me? I kept my silence. But sometimes at night, I hear it, that voice, that breathing. And I know the truth. We didn't just escape the facility, it escaped with us.